The doors of the Grand Hyatt Seoul swung open, and every head in the room turned. Adaeze Yoon walked in like she had been expected. She wore cobalt blue, deep, unapologetic, the color of a woman who had long stopped dressing for other people's comfort. Beside her, holding her hands on both sides, were 3 5-year-olds in matching outfits. A girl with her mother's cheekbones. A boy with a stillness too old for his face. Another girl who was already scanning the room like she owned it. The string quartet lost its place. 200 of Seoul's most powerful people stopped breathing at the same time. At the altar, Yoon Tae-sung felt his best man touch his arm. He didn't respond. He was looking at the woman in cobalt blue the way a man looks at something he buried coming back up through the earth. He was also looking at 3 small faces that did something very specific to his chest. His father, Chairman Yoon, sat in the front row. His knuckles, wrapped around the ivory handle of his cane, went white. Neither man said a word. Adaeze found a seat 3 rows from the back, settled her children quietly, adjusted the collar of the smallest one, and folded her hands in her lap like she had arrived to watch nothing more dramatic than a school play. She did not look at the altar again. If you are new here, subscribe right now, because this story will have you in your feelings from beginning to end. Like this video, drop a comment, and let's get into it. 6 years earlier, Adaeze had been the kind of woman that made a room rearrange itself. She was the daughter of a Nigerian father and a Korean mother, raised between Lagos and Seoul, fluent in 3 languages, and carrying the particular confidence of someone who had been called exotic so many times she had stopped hearing it as a compliment. She was a medical doctor. She was precise. She was warm in the way that cost something. She met Yoon Tae-sung at a pharmaceutical conference in Seoul. He was presenting research on medical access in West Africa. She sat in the 3rd row and within 4 minutes raised her hand and told him, in front of everyone, that his dataset had a fundamental gap. He stood at the podium and stared at her. Then he said, "You're right." He found her after the session ended. "You were brutal up there," he said. "You were wrong up there," she replied. He laughed. She noticed it was the laugh of a man who had forgotten he could. They dated across 3 continents for 2 years. He flew to Lagos for her mother's birthday and ate pepper soup without complaining, which her father said meant more than any ring. She flew to Seoul for his grandfather's memorial and sat with his family in silence and knew exactly what that silence meant, which made his mother cry quietly in the kitchen afterward for reasons she never explained. Their wedding happened twice. Once in Lagos with full Igbo traditional ceremony. Her aunties wrapped her in orange and gold and sang so loud the neighbors joined in. Once in Seoul in a quiet garden where his grandmother pressed both of Adaeze's hands and said something that his mother refused to translate. He called her his everything. In Korean. In English. Sometimes just with the way he looked at her across a room. For 3 years, they were the kind of happy that almost feels like a warning. The problem arrived quietly, the way the worst things always do. They had been trying to conceive for 14 months. Adaeze was not panicking. She was a doctor. She understood timelines. She understood bodies. She went in for testing the way she would advise any patient to. Methodically, without drama. She went alone because Tae-sung had a board meeting he could not leave. She thought nothing of it. 2 weeks later, she was not called by her doctor. She was called by her father-in-law's assistant and asked to come to Chairman Yoon's private office at the Yoon Group headquarters. She should have known then. She told herself later that she had known then. But love makes people extend the benefit of the doubt past all reasonable distance. Chairman Yoon sat behind a desk the size of a dining table and slid a manila folder toward her, without standing up. "The results are conclusive," he said. "You are unable to carry children. The condition is irreversible." He paused. "I trust you are intelligent enough to understand what this means for this family." She opened the folder. Her name, her date of birth, medical language arranged in neat, devastating rows. She read it twice. She was a doctor. She understood every word. She closed the folder. She placed it back on his desk. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of his office without a single word, because she understood that some men only feel powerful when they watch you break, and she was not going to give Chairman Yoon that particular satisfaction. She told Tae-sung that evening. She sat across from him at their kitchen table and told him everything. The meeting, the folder, the words irreversible and conclusive, and she watched his face while she spoke. He already knew. She didn't understand it fully in that moment. She would understand it later. At 3 a.m. in Lagos with 3 sleeping newborns in the next room, going over that night frame by frame. The way he held her. The way he cried. How his tears had the specific quality of guilt rather than grief. How he said "I'm sorry" too many times for a man receiving news for the first time. He already knew. 3 months later, on a Sunday evening when the light was going orange through their apartment windows, he sat down across from her and asked for a divorce. He said, "I don't have a choice." She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, you do. You're just not choosing me." He didn't answer. She signed the papers 4 days later, took nothing from the settlement, and flew to Lagos that same night with 1 suitcase and the specific numbness of a woman who had used up all her tears on the flight and arrived empty, which was its own kind of clean. She was 6 weeks pregnant.
She didn't know yet.
Lagos received her the way it always received its daughters.
Loudly.
Warmly. Without asking too many questions in the first week. Her Auntie Ngozi fed her EBA and egusi soup and let her sleep 12 hours a day and told everyone who asked that Adaeze was simply resting. In Nigeria, a woman returning home to rest was a complete explanation. Nobody pushed. It was Auntie Ngozi herself who pushed on the 8th day. She stood in the doorway of Adaeze's childhood bedroom with both arms folded and said, "Your face has been puffy since Tuesday, and you have vomited every morning, including this one. Either you are pregnant, or my cooking has turned against you personally, and I refuse to accept that." Adaeze laughed for the first time since she had landed. It hurt, the way laughing hurts when you have been clenching everything for too long. She went to the clinic the next morning alone. The sonographer was a small, quiet woman who had been doing this job for 20 years and had learned that silence was sometimes the most professional thing she could offer. She moved the probe slowly. She stopped. She moved it again. She tilted the screen slightly toward herself and then tilted it back. Then she said carefully, "I need you to look at this." Adaeze looked. 3 heartbeats. Distinct. Steady. Undeniable. The sonographer said something else after that, but Adaeze did not hear it. She was staring at the screen with the expression of a woman watching the entire architecture of her life redesign itself in real time. She sat in her car in the clinic parking lot for 1 hour and 40 minutes. She ran every calculation she knew how to run. She was a doctor. She understood what her body had done. She understood the timing. She understood exactly what these 3 heartbeats meant in relation to the man who had sat across from her in their kitchen and said he had no choice. She understood something else too. Something colder and more clarifying than grief. The report had said irreversible. It had said conclusive. She was a medical doctor who had just watched a sonographer find 3 living heartbeats inside the body that report had written off as empty. Someone had lied. She did not cry in the parking lot. She had done her crying on the plane. What she felt now was not sadness. It was not even anger. It was the specific, electric clarity of a woman who has just understood exactly what was done to her, and by whom and why. She drove home. She ate Auntie Ngozi's soup. She said nothing. That night, after the house was quiet, she made her decision. She would not call Tae-sung. Not now. The man had sat in their kitchen and wept with the tears of someone who already knew, which meant the man had known his father was lying and had chosen his inheritance over her truth. Calling him now, pregnant and alone in Lagos, would hand her the most vulnerable moment of her life to a family that had already proven what they did with her vulnerability. Her children would not enter the world as a negotiation. They would not grow up as leverage in a dynasty's boardroom. They would be born in this house, in this city, surrounded by women who sang too loud and cooked too much and loved without conditions attached. She put her phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The years moved the way good years do, fast and full. Zara arrived first, furious and squinting, like she had opinions about the lighting. Tobias came second, quiet and wide-eyed, looking at everything with a seriousness that made the nurses laugh. Suwa came last and came quickly and immediately grabbed the doctor's finger and held it, which everyone agreed said everything about her personality. Adaeze lay in that hospital bed with all three of them on her chest and felt something she had no medical term for. It was bigger than relief. It was bigger than love. It was the feeling of being proven right by the universe after everyone who should have protected you chose not to. She reopened her medical practice 8 months later. She specialized in fertility medicine. People asked why she chose that particular field, and she always gave a clean professional answer about gaps in West African healthcare. The real answer lived in a manila folder she had kept, because she knew that one day she would need to understand exactly how it had been falsified and by whom. She found out 3 years later through a former colleague who worked medical ethics investigations. The clinic, the payment, the physician whose license had since been quietly revoked for unrelated misconduct. Chairman Yoon's fingerprints were not on the document, but his money was, and money leaves a specific kind of trace when you know how to look. She filed the information carefully and told no one. She was not ready to use it. She was not sure she ever would be. Some weapons are most powerful when the other side doesn't know you're holding them. The children grew. Zara developed opinions about architecture before she could spell it. Tobias cried at the end of every animated film and then denied it with great dignity. Suwa learned to negotiate her bedtime with arguments so structured that Adaeze once had to leave the room to hide her smile. They grew up eating jollof rice and kimchi at the same table. They called their grandmother Mama Ngozi and their great-grandmother Halmiani over video call every Sunday. They moved between languages the way other children moved between rooms, naturally, without thinking, as if the whole world were simply one large house with many doors. Adaeze watched them and thought sometimes, quietly, that Tae-sung had done her the most devastating favor of his life when he chose silence over her. She had built something he could never have permitted her to build inside his father's empire. She had built a life that belonged entirely to itself. Then the envelope arrived. Her clinic receptionist brought it in on a Tuesday afternoon with a slightly cautious expression of someone who could not identify the energy of what she was carrying. Thick cream paper. Seoul postmark. Adaeze's full name written in a handwriting she recognized without wanting to. She opened it at her desk after her last patient. Yoon Tae-sung and Park Seon-ju, together with their families. The honor of your presence. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked out her window at the Lagos street below, the Okadas weaving, the fruit sellers arranging pyramids of oranges, the ordinary magnificent chaos of the city that had caught her when she fell. She thought about throwing it away. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about Zara, Tobias, and Suwa, who had never seen Seoul, who had never walked the streets that made up half of who they were, who deserved to stand in every room that their blood had paid the entrance fee for. She picked up the invitation again. She thought about Chairman Yoon sitting in a front row at his son's wedding, satisfied, untouchable, certain that the woman he had erased was somewhere quietly diminished. She picked up her phone and booked 4 business class tickets to Seoul. She did not send an RSVP. We are almost at the end. If this story has you feeling something like this video right now and subscribe. You do not want to miss how this ends.